What would you do if the man you've loved for 40 years turned to you one morning and asked, "Excuse me, do you work here?" That's the moment everything changed for Evelyn Carter. She was pouring coffee into 2 chipped mugs, his and hers from a garage sale, when they first moved into their tiny Chicago apartment in the 80s. The smell of toast filled the room. The morning sun bounced off the window pane like it always had. But this time his eyes were empty. Not confused. Empty. Evelyn turned slowly, coffee pot in hand. "Morning, sweetheart." He looked up. "I'm sorry, I don't think we've met." She didn't drop the pot, didn't scream. She simply smiled, a trembling smile honed over years of caregiving, and said, "That's okay, love. Let me introduce myself again." Evelyn was 61 when her husband Thomas was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Before the illness, he was a high school basketball coach, a tall, broad-shouldered man whose voice could silence a gym but melt when he read bedtime stories to their daughters. He was a Sunday morning pancake maker and a weekday foot rub giver. She was a nurse retired early. Not because she wanted to, but because someone had to stay home when Tom couldn't remember the way to the mailbox. Their daughters had moved to different states. They visited when they could. But day to day, it was Evelyn who held the line. She watched the love of her life vanish, not in one moment, but in slow, aching increments. The man who once carried her through a flooded basement now struggled to put on his socks. And worst of all, he sometimes called her Linda, his sister's name. But she stayed. She stayed through the long nights when he wandered the halls, through the days when he stared at her like a stranger, through the anger, the silence, the stares, and on her darkest day, when he screamed at her to get out of his house, Evelyn sat alone on the cold bathroom floor, clutching a photo from their wedding day. "Should I give up?" she whispered. "Is this still love if I'm the only one who remembers it?" Spring came with a quiet kind of beauty, soft blossoms blooming along the garden's edge, and light filtering through the lace curtains of the dining room like a whispered promise. Evelyn stood in the backyard soil beneath her fingers, knees aching, heart full. The garden had always been Tom's space. Rows of tomatoes, neat herbs, roses by the fence. After the diagnosis, the plants had wilted as he forgot their names. And then their needs. But Evelyn couldn't let it die. She began again that spring, not because she had time or energy, or even the certainty that it mattered, but because it was a place where his hands had once remembered. Each seed she planted felt like a prayer whispered into the earth. Lavender for calm. Daisies for the days they laughed in their youth. Basil and rosemary for meals they once made together, now long forgotten. Tom watched from the kitchen window, his gaze glassy. Some days he didn't know who she was. But on one afternoon, while Evelyn dug at the soil, he came outside and stood beside her silently. He reached for a spade. "Is this where the carrots go?" he asked softly. Evelyn froze. Her heart skipped. "Yes," she whispered, blinking quickly. "Yes, right there." It might have been a flicker, a glint of memory dancing just beyond reach, but it was enough. They planted in silence, hands moving side by side, rhythm matched like an old dance remembered by muscle rather than mind. That evening, she wrote in her journal, "Today, Tom remembered the carrots. Only for a moment, but it felt like the sun came back to sit with me a while. The garden grew not just with vegetables, but with hope. Neighbors would stop by noticing the colors returning to her yard. One even called it the memory garden. It became a place of ritual. Evelyn would walk its paths and talk to Tom whether he understood or not. Sometimes he would nod. Sometimes he would smile. Sometimes he would look away. But always she showed up. Because in tending the soil, she was tending love itself. And in every bloom she saw a promise. Even when memory fades, devotion doesn't have to. The calendar didn't lie. 40 years. Their wedding anniversary arrived quietly that year. No cards, no roses. Just a soft drizzle outside and the smell of toast lingering in the air. Tom sat at the table staring at the window, tracing invisible lines on the wood grain with his finger. He didn't say a word. He didn't know what day it was. He didn't know her. Evelyn pulled out the old wedding album from the hallway shelf. The cover was worn, the pages yellowed. She sat beside him, laying it open slowly, like unveiling a sacred text. "That was the church," she said, gently pointing to a picture. It rained that day, too. Tom blinked. looks happy. She smiled. They flipped through pages, Evelyn doing the talking, Tom the listening. Sometimes he'd tilt his head squint and mutter something like, "Is that your sister?" Once his finger stopped on a photo. Her in a white dress, him in a borrowed suit, both of them laughing. "That's you?" he asked, almost childlike. "Yes," she whispered. "That was me. And that was you. We were just kids." Tom nodded, thoughtful. They didn't exchange gifts, no fancy dinner, just reheated stew and the soft light of the kitchen lamp. But when Evelyn reached across the table to take his hand, he didn't pull away. He didn't remember the vows. But in that moment, he honored them. Later that night, she wrote in her journal, "Today we celebrated a wedding he doesn't recall, with a kind of love I'll never forget." The morning sun spilled through the curtains, painting soft gold on the bedroom walls. Evelyn placed a cup of coffee on the table next to Tom, the same way she had for decades, milk first 2 sugars. He looked up confused. "Thank you," he said politely. Then, after a pause, "I'm sorry, but what's your name again?" The world stopped. Not with a crash, not with thunder. Just silence so sharp and sudden that Evelyn almost dropped the cup in her hand. She'd known this day might come. The doctors had warned her, the books had explained it, the support group had murmured stories just like this. But none of it could prepare her for the moment her husband, her best friend, her partner of 40 years, looked into her eyes and saw a stranger. She smiled. Not because she felt like it, but because love, real love, shows up anyway. "I'm Evelyn," she said gently, voice steady, despite the ache in her throat. "We've known each other a very long time." He blinked, processing, then smiled awkwardly. "You seem kind." She turned away so he wouldn't see the tears forming. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall, her breath caught somewhere between heartbreak and acceptance. What does it mean when the person who holds half your life no longer holds your name? Later that afternoon, she walked him through their house like it was a museum. "This is the kitchen you painted yellow for me when I was pregnant with Rachel," she said. "That's the dent in the hallway wall from when Sam tried to ride his skateboard inside. And this," she placed his hand on her chest, "is where I keep every memory, even the ones you've lost." That night, she didn't write in her journal. She just sat in the dark, his hand in hers, and listened to the clock tick. It was the sound of time slipping, and her refusing to let go. The forecast had warned of heavy winds and scattered thunderstorms, but Evelyn barely paid attention. There were always storms. Weather was the least of her worries these days. That night, the power went out. The living room, dimly lit by a flickering candle, cast long shadows on the walls. Rain lashed against the windows, thunder rolled like a warning from above. And in the middle of it all, Tom began to panic. "Where am I?" he asked, his voice trembling. Who turned off the lights? Is this a hospital?" Evelyn rose from the couch and reached for him gently. "No love? You're home. It's just a storm outside." But his confusion thickened. He backed away, clutching a throw pillow like a shield. "I want to go home. Take me home." "You are home," she said, trying to keep her voice calm. "I'm Evelyn, your wife. I'm right here." But he didn't believe her. His eyes darted around the room like a frightened child's. He didn't see her. Not really. That was the moment the storm outside met the storm within. Evelyn's knees gave out, and she sank to the floor, not from fear, but from grief. She'd carried so much for so long. And now, in the dark with no power and no connection, it all felt like too much. Tom sat across from her, rocking slightly. And as the minutes passed, the rain softened. Then, as if guided by some instinct older than memory, he stood and shuffled toward her. Slowly, carefully, he knelt beside her. He didn't say her name, but he placed his hand over hers. They sat like that in silence, the candle burning low, the storm now distant. Evelyn didn't need him to remember. In that moment, he chose her again. Without memory, without certainty. Just a quiet reaching across the void. Later that night, with the power still out, she wrote by flashlight in her journal. "Tonight the storm came, but so did grace. He forgot where we were, but he remembered how to hold my hand. It started with a fall." Evelyn heard the thud from the kitchen. The unmistakable, bone-chilling sound of a body hitting the floor. She ran, heart racing, and found Tom lying near the hallway. His eyes were wide with confusion, but he wasn't crying. He never did. He didn't know what had happened. She knelt beside him. "Can you move? Does anything hurt?" Tom blinked slowly. "Did I drop something?" That night they were in the emergency room. Cold air, bright lights, and endless waiting. Doctors came and went, asking questions Evelyn answered alone. Tom stared at the ceiling tiles, mumbling about his mother, who'd passed decades ago. It wasn't just a fall, it was a fracture his hip. And just like that, everything became more complicated. He needed surgery, then rehab, then weeks of physical therapy. For the first time, Evelyn wondered if she could do this. If she had the strength to keep walking this road. While Tom slept in a hospital bed surrounded by machines and murmurs, Evelyn stepped outside to breathe. She leaned against a cold brick wall and finally cried. She cried for the weight of care. She cried for the man who used to carry her across puddles just to keep her shoes dry. She cried for all the pieces of him that were slowly disappearing. A nurse named Carla approached her gently. "He's lucky to have you." Evelyn laughed bitterly through her tears. "Some days I don't feel like enough." Carla nodded. "We see a lot in this ward. People come and go. But love like yours? It's rare. It stays." Evelyn tucked that sentence in her heart like a note in a bottle. Over the next few weeks, she visited the rehab center daily. She brought homemade soup, his favorite socks photos from their travels. She read to him aloud from a worn paperback. Sometimes he listened. Sometimes he drifted. And one afternoon, as she helped him into a wheelchair, he looked at her and said, "You came back." She smiled gently. "Of course I did." That night, her journal entry was short. He doesn't remember falling. Or the hospital. But today, he remembered that I always come back. And that's enough. Winter came early that year. The cold settled into the bones of the house like it too was aging, creaking in the night, sighing beneath the weight of memory. Evelyn wrapped Tom's shawl tighter around his shoulders as she wheeled him near the fireplace. He stared into the flames as if trying to remember something just out of reach. "Do you remember this house, Tom?" she asked softly. He didn't answer, but his fingers tapped rhythmically against the chair's armrest, an old habit from when he used to hum jazz tunes while fixing things around the house. That was his song. Her clue that somewhere inside, he was still there. That night, she sat at the kitchen table with her old photo albums. Yellowed corners, Polaroids fading the kind that smelled like dust and time. She traced her finger along the spine of one in particular, Tom and Evelyn, 1980-1990. A whole decade in 100 photos. She paused on one. Tom holding their baby daughter high in the air, her tiny hands reaching toward the sun. Evelyn's handwritten caption underneath, "You catch her, I'll dream big." How long had it been since she saw that spark in his eyes? The next morning, she made a decision. She would bring the past to the present. If his mind could no longer walk with her forward, she would walk with him backward. Each day, she created a memory station in the house. On Monday, it was their wedding. She wore her old veil, lit a candle with their names carved on the side, and played the song they danced to, Unforgettable. On Wednesday, it was their road trip through Montana. She baked the same cherry pie from that trip, sat with him in the garden, and told him stories of buffalo sunsets and cheap motel laughter. And every Friday became Friday Films, where she projected old home movies onto a sheet in the living room. Tom didn't always react, but every now and then a flicker crossed his face, a tear, a grin, a tilt of the head. And Evelyn lived for those flickers. One evening, as the screen played their daughter's graduation, Tom turned to Evelyn and whispered, "You've been with me a long time, haven't you?" Her breath caught. "Yes, Tom, 40 years. He nodded slowly. "I think I knew that." And in that moment for Evelyn, it was as if the fog lifted just enough for love to shine through. Not as memory, but as presence. Not as logic, but as truth. That night, she opened her journal again. Even when his memory is gone, his soul remembers the rhythm of us. I see it in his hands, feel it in his silence. That's the miracle. That night, Evelyn didn't sleep. She planned. The next morning, Evelyn did something she hadn't done in months. She opened the curtains wide, letting sunlight bathe the living room in gold. She brewed fresh coffee, not just for the caffeine, but for the ritual. And then with trembling hands, she pulled a box out from the hallway closet labeled Tom's Memories. Inside were baseball trophies, photo albums, old letters, a worn-out University of Illinois sweatshirt, and his lucky whistle, the one he wore at every game. She laid each item on the kitchen table like sacred relics. One by one, she began showing them to Thomas. "This is you coaching your first team," she said, holding up a yellowing photograph. He blinked. Then, slowly, a smile curled at the edge of his lips. "That boy. That's James Heller. He made varsity freshman year." Tears welled in Evelyn's eyes. "Yes, love. That's him." Something flickered. Not a full return, but a spark, a thread. And Evelyn decided if she had to become the keeper of his past, she would. Fiercely, she began organizing their days with small rituals. Mornings with photo albums. Afternoons with old jazz records he used to hum to. Evenings reading their daughter's childhood letters. And she journaled every moment, every laugh, every recognition, every silence. Her notes became a quiet battle against oblivion. But it wasn't easy. There were days Thomas refused to speak. Days he mistook the TV for a window and tried to climb out. Days he wept uncontrollably, asking for his mother. On one particularly bad day, he looked at Evelyn and screamed, "You're lying. My wife is dead." She walked to the porch, sat on the swing, and let herself cry. Not for him, but for the version of her that was fading too. She missed being called beautiful, missed being held, missed the man who once danced with her in the grocery store aisle because their favorite song came on. But the next morning she made pancakes. She played Louis Armstrong on the record player, and she laid his whistle next to his plate. Because Evelyn Carter may have been invisible to the man she loved, but she refused to disappear. In the spring of Evelyn's 63rd year, she planted a garden. It wasn't just for flowers. It was for memories. Marigolds for their honeymoon in Mexico. Tom always said they looked like sunshine. Lavender for the perfume she wore when they met. Tomatoes because he once tried to grow them on their windowsill and failed miserably. Each seed was planted with a story. Each sprout a small rebellion against forgetting. Evelyn didn't know much about gardening, but she knew that growth, real growth, took time, care, and faith. It was the same with Tom. Some days he was nothing but shadows. Other days he remembered how she liked her tea. One afternoon, as she knelt among the dirt pulling weeds, she heard him behind her. "This place smells like my grandma's house," he said, sniffing the air. She turned, heart pounding. She had a garden. He nodded. Lavender and jam. She laughed through her tears. "You always said her strawberry jam could heal anything." He looked confused. "I said that. You did." He stood there quiet, then shuffled back inside. But for Evelyn, that was everything. She began taking Tom outside, more seating him by the roses, reading to him, while bees hummed in the background. Neighbors noticed. Mrs. Patterson from across the street began bringing over homemade meals. A teenager, Jaden, offered to mow the lawn every weekend. "My grandpa had Alzheimer's," he said quietly. People were watching, and Evelyn, for the first time in a long while, didn't feel alone. She joined an online support group. Wives Who Stay, it was called. Late at night after Tom was asleep, she typed messages into the void. Today, he asked me who I was. Again. But then, he called me darlin' just before bedtime. My heart cracked open. "I think I'll try again tomorrow." Others replied, "Try the memory box technique. Play his favorite music. Sometimes it brings them back. You're not alone. We see you." And so Evelyn began to heal, not by erasing her pain, but by stitching it into something useful. A quilt made of endurance, faith, and love. She wrote sticky notes with affirmations on the bathroom mirror. "You are strong. You are not invisible. This is still love." And every morning she whispered to herself, "Today is a gift even if he doesn't remember it tomorrow." It was a Wednesday afternoon. The sun had just begun its descent behind the row of birch trees outside their home, bathing the living room in golden light. Evelyn was folding laundry on the couch. The radio played softly in the background, an old jazz station filled with crooners and big band nostalgia. Then it came on. Their song, Moon River. The first time they danced to it was on a rainy night after prom. The second time on their wedding night. And hundreds of times after that. At parties, in the kitchen. Even once barefoot in the backyard after watching a meteor shower. Evelyn turned to Tom with hopeful eyes. "Do you remember this?" she asked, heart fluttering. He tilted his head, listening. Then, without recognition, he said, It's nice. Who sings it? A silence thickened between them. She forced a smile. Andy Williams. It was our song. He nodded slowly, politely, as if he were trying to please a stranger. And in that moment, Evelyn felt the sharp, quiet grief of another piece of their history falling into the void. She didn't cry that time. Instead, she walked over to the record player, took the vinyl sleeve in her hands, and kissed the cover. Moon River, she whispered. Keep him company wherever he is. That night, after he'd gone to bed, she danced alone in the living room. One arm outstretched as if someone were still holding her. She moved slowly, eyes closed, letting memory take the place of reality. And just before the song ended, Tom shuffled back into the room, rubbing his eyes. I heard music, he said. You dancing? Evelyn paused. Yes, just me. He squinted, then stepped closer. May I? It was a question he hadn't asked in years. Tears filled her eyes as she held out her hand. For 2 minutes and 46 seconds, they moved in slow circles under the ceiling light. He didn't know her name, but he held her like he used to. And for Evelyn, that was enough. It was June 3rd, their 40th wedding anniversary. Evelyn woke early, as she always did. The house was quiet, except for the slow hum of the refrigerator and the gentle creak of the old pine floor beneath her slippers. She set the kettle on the stove and reached for the faded photo album on the shelf, a ritual of memory she'd long embraced. There on the front page was the picture Evelyn and Lace Tom in his military blues eyes, only for each other. Behind them, a line of white chairs and a gazebo wrapped in ivy. She traced the edge of the photo with her fingers. 40 years, she whispered more to herself than to the empty room. By the time Tom shuffled into the kitchen, Evelyn had made his favorite breakfast, scrambled eggs with chives sourdough toast and a touch of raspberry jam. She even placed a small vase of wildflowers between them, freshly picked from the garden. Tom sat down, nodded a thank you, and dug in. Evelyn waited. Halfway through his toast, she asked gently, Do you know what today is? He looked up confused. Tuesday. She smiled faintly. It's our anniversary. 40 years ago today, we got married under that big oak tree in your parents' backyard. He paused, blinked, then offered a vague smile. That sounds nice. It was a clean slice through the heart. She spent most of the morning tending the garden alone, pulling weeds, trimming lavender, trying to busy her hands while her heart whispered reminders of past celebrations, trips, surprises, candlelit dinners. The year he wrote her a love poem and read it aloud by the fire. The time he built her a swing and carved their initials into the seat. By noon, she sat on the porch sweaty and spent sipping lemonade. Tom came out holding a piece of paper. I found this in the drawer, he said, handing it to her. It was the poem, the same one from their 20th anniversary. His handwriting still neat, still full of feeling, though he no longer remembered writing it. She looked up at him stunned. He shrugged. Don't know why, but I think it's for you. Her lips trembled. She read it aloud. And as she did, Tom watched her, a slight furrow in his brow, like he was chasing a memory just out of reach. When she finished, he whispered, That was beautiful. She reached for his hand. You wrote it. He blinked. Really? Yes, she said softly, a long time ago. Tom looked at her, something flickering in his eyes. Then I must have loved you very much. Evelyn smiled through tears. You still do. Even if you forget, I'll remember for both of us. That night, they sat on the porch swing as the stars began to scatter across the sky. And though he didn't know what day it was, he leaned his head on her shoulder. And Evelyn once again let love be enough. It started with a broken plate, a crash in the kitchen, a sharp cry of no, followed by the sound of porcelain splintering across tile. Evelyn ran in heart racing. Tom stood there trembling, a look of pure terror on his face. I don't know where I am, he shouted. Why am I here? Who are you? She froze. Not because it was the first time this kind of confusion had come before, but because the way he looked at her. Like she was a stranger who had just broken into his life. I'm your wife, Tom, she said calmly, though her hands shook. You're home. You're safe. He backed away. I want to go home. That night, after he finally fell asleep, Evelyn sat in the bathroom with the door locked and the lights off. She cried for an hour. Tears for every forgotten moment. For every morning he didn't say her name. For every time he asked, Do I know you? She thought of packing a bag. Just walking away. leaving the memories behind, letting someone else take over. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered. "I don't even know who I am without him remembering me." Then she noticed her reflection in the mirror. Tired eyes, wrinkled hands, but also strength. Not loud, not fierce, but there. That night she didn't sleep. She planned. The rain had been falling all afternoon, a soft, rhythmic tapping against the kitchen window. Evelyn sat at the table, a cup of tea cooling in front of her, untouched. The house was quiet, unusually so. Tom had gone down for a nap an hour ago, and the silence left too much space for memory. Her eyes drifted to the drawer beside her, the one with old Bill's yellowed recipes and a single envelope. She reached in and pulled it out. The envelope was addressed simply to my Tom, in case you ever remember. She'd written it 6 months after the diagnosis. Back when he still remembered their phone number, the names of their children, and the color of her eyes. Back when she thought maybe it was a phase or a mistake. She unfolded the letter. "My dearest Tom, if you're reading this, it means something came back to you, maybe a moment, a glimmer, a flicker of who we were, of who we are. I don't know if you'll remember our wedding under the oak tree, or how we danced barefoot in the kitchen to Moon River. But I want you to know I have never stopped loving you. Not for a second. Not even on the hardest days. You once told me I was your home, that as long as I was near, you'd never be lost. Well, my love, you've been lost for some time now. But I've never stopped being your home. I tuck you in at night. I hold your hand when you tremble. I whisper your name even when you forget mine. And no matter where your mind wanders, my heart follows. Forever yours, Evelyn." Her hands trembled as she folded it again. She had never shown it to anyone. Never read it aloud. Suddenly, Tom's voice called from the hallway. "Evie." She stood so quickly, her chair scraped the floor. He only used that nickname once in a blue moon now. The last time had been nearly a year ago. She found him in the hallway, blinking slowly. "Did you call me?" she asked. He nodded. I had a dream. You were singing." She smiled gently. "What was I singing?" He thought hard. That river song, the one you like? Her heart caught in her throat. "Moon River." He nodded. "Yes, that one." Then, just as quickly, he looked confused. "Why are you crying?" She shook her head. "Because I'm happy." He didn't understand, but he reached for her hand. And Evelyn knew maybe he wouldn't remember the letter. But he still felt the love it carried. She slipped the envelope into the back of a photo album that night. Not because she gave up hope, but because she realized she no longer needed the letter to tell him how she felt. She showed him, every single day. It was a Tuesday when the vacuum cleaner broke. One of those small inconveniences that feel like a landslide when the world is already fragile. Evelyn sat cross-legged on the living room floor, the pieces of the vacuum laid out like a puzzle she had no strength to solve. Tom sat quietly on the couch, staring at the TV with no sound, his expression blank. She didn't cry. She wanted to, but her tears had started to feel selfish. She stared at the disassembled machine frustration bubbling beneath her tired skin. Money was tight. Every dollar now stretched like a rubber band pulled too far. And the repair shop quoted a price that made her chest tighten. That afternoon, Evelyn walked down to the corner store to buy a loaf of bread. Her steps were slower now, not because of age, but the heaviness of emotional exhaustion. The cashier, a young woman named Lily, always smiled at her. "Everything okay, Mrs. Evelyn?" Evelyn hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Oh, you know, just another day." But Lily saw through it. Something about the way Evelyn held her shoulders, the way she lingered just a second too long before walking away. The next morning, a van pulled into Evelyn's driveway. Out stepped Lily and her older brother, carrying a vacuum cleaner. Not the broken one, a new one. Evelyn opened the door, stunned. I can't accept this," she whispered. Lily shook her head. "You've been shopping here for years. You bring Tom in and always ask about our mom. You remember everyone's names. You matter to people, Evelyn. We just wanted to make one thing easier." Evelyn stood frozen, then her lip trembled. She covered her mouth with her hand. "I don't know what to say." "Just say you'll keep smiling," Lily replied. That evening, Evelyn vacuumed the living room while Tom hummed to himself in the corner. She watched the dust disappear into the machine, and with it, a bit of the weight she'd been carrying. It wasn't about the appliance, it was about being seen. In a world that often forgot her, forgot them someone remembered. Later that night, she added a note to her journal, "Today, kindness knocked on my door and refused to leave. I will remember this." Tom may have lost his memory, but Evelyn was learning how many people held on to hers. Evelyn woke before the sun. The world outside was quiet, draped in silver fog and gentle stillness. She tiptoed to Tom's bedside as she always did, checking his breathing, adjusting his blanket. He looked peaceful. That morning, he didn't open his eyes. The doctor said it was gentle, no pain. Just a soft slipping away like the final note of a lullaby. She sat beside him for hours, holding his hand, speaking to him in present tense because her love for him was never past. "I never forgot you, Tom, not for a moment." The days that followed were full of phone calls, condolences, casseroles left on the porch. But Evelyn didn't cry. Not then. She felt quiet, like a tide had pulled away, and she stood alone on the shore. It was only at night when the house creaked without him that the ache settled in. She wrote in her journal, "He forgot the memories, but never the love. I was the keeper of both. Now I am the storyteller." Months later, Evelyn began volunteering at a local Alzheimer's support group. She read aloud letters she'd written to Tom, shared her journey, and held the hands of strangers navigating the same dark hallways. One day, a young woman approached her after a session. "Do you think it's possible to love someone when they don't remember you?" Evelyn smiled. Love isn't made of memory, it's made of presence, of showing up again and again. She walked home that evening, under a sky blooming with stars. Above her, the world moved forward. Inside her, Tom still lived in rhythm and breath, in the quiet between words. And for the first time, Evelyn looked in the mirror and said aloud, "I made it." The final line in her journal read, "He doesn't remember me, but I never forgot him. And that love, it remembered us both." If it were you, what would you do? Share your thoughts below, or tell us about the love you've held on to long after memory faded.